She had no name, no sight, and no reason to keep walking. Wandering alone through a world she couldn't see, the blind bobcat was just skin and bones by the time she reached the edge of the human world. Every sound was a threat. Every breath, a memory of pain. No one had ever reached for her, not with kindness, not with care. But just when she stopped moving, just when her body gave in, a dog found her. And what he did next defied every instinct nature had written in their blood. Before we begin, this isn't just a story about a blind bobcat. It's about what happens when survival meets the unexpected kindness of a stranger. If you believe in second chances, in the wild ways life finds a way, take a moment to subscribe. Because stories like this don't come often. And the next one might change the way you see the world. The cabin didn't show up on most maps anymore. Not digital ones, at least. It was tucked near the end of a forgotten dirt road, behind a wall of gnarled pine that looked the same in every direction, east, west, north, south. Even the mailbox was gone, rusted off its post by some past winter storm and never replaced. If someone wanted to find it, they'd have to mean it. And no one did. Except maybe Nova. The dog had shown up the same year the world went quiet for Graham Elliott. She wasn't a puppy when she arrived, more like a stray with too much history behind her eyes and fur matted with old dust. Graham hadn't meant to keep her. He barely knew how to keep himself going back then. But she stayed. Laid down at the foot of his porch and watched the woods like she was waiting for something. That was almost 2 years ago. Now, the two of them shared a rhythm. Quiet mornings. Coffee on the steps. Afternoon walks down to the old streambed if the weather wasn't too cruel. They didn't need much. Not words. Not visitors. Not explanations. Graham, now 48, wore his solitude like a second skin. He didn't speak often. Didn't shave. His beard had gone silver at the edges and his hands were scarred in the quiet way that says a man has worked hard and hurt quietly. He had once been a wildlife surveyor, part biologist, part cartographer. He'd mapped old-growth forests across the western corridor. Tracked migration patterns. Taught kids how to read deer tracks and spot fox dens under roots. That life had ended the day his wife, Anna, collapsed in the kitchen and never got back up. 3 years. No visitors. No town visits unless he absolutely had to. The local mechanic knew to leave parts at the edge of the gate. The grocer delivered boxes once a month. Everything else, Graham grew or ignored. But life has a way of slipping through cracks. Especially wildlife. It started with Nova not returning. The first day, he didn't worry. She was a smart dog, half husky, half lab, with the kind of nose that could find her way home in a blizzard. But when the second day bled into dusk with no sight of her, he grabbed his coat and went looking. He didn't call out. Nova didn't respond to shouting. She listened for tone, not panic. It was the third morning when she returned. Muzzle damp. Fur streaked with something darker than mud. Her eyes locked with his at the doorway, and she let out a short, urgent sound, half whine, half command. He followed. They went deeper than usual, past the ridgeline where the earth began to dip, where fallen logs made uneven bridges and the canopy thinned just enough to let in a slow filtered light. Nova moved like she was tracing memory. No hesitations. No backtracking. And there, in a shallow ditch beneath a mess of brambles and moss, lay the bobcat. At first, Graham thought it was dead. Its body was folded in, ribs sharp as arrowheads, legs trembling with each breath. Its coat was dirty, gray-brown flecked with blood and pine dust, and one of its eyes was just missing. Not gouged recently, but long gone. Healed over in a way that suggested a wound older than most animals would survive. The other eye, still intact, was a pale film of milky white. Blind. At least mostly. Nova didn't hesitate. She stepped into the ditch and lay down beside the cat, not touching, just close enough to feel her warmth. Graham stayed above, unsure. This was a wild animal. Even half dead, a bobcat was no house cat. It could tear flesh, even if it couldn't see. But Ash didn't move. Didn't hiss. Didn't flinch. Nova looked up at him once, as if saying, "Do something." He didn't. Instead, he returned home, thinking that nature would do what it always did, finish the suffering. He told himself not to get involved. But he returned the next morning. And the next. He left a piece of meat near the edge of the ditch. Clean water in a metal bowl. By the 5th day, the meat had been dragged, clumsily but clearly, toward the bobcat's body. Graham crouched down that day. Looked at the creature, really looked. The ears were tattered, like it had been in too many fights. Its coat was patchy, formatted in places and slick with old scars. But it was breathing. When Nova nudged the cat softly with her nose, the bobcat didn't react with fear or pain. It just leaned, minutely, barely, into her. Graham, who hadn't spoken aloud in weeks, found himself whispering, "You don't have to die here." The next day, he built the pen. It wasn't much, some salvaged fencing, old posts from when he tried growing tomatoes 2 summers ago, and a tarp stretched between trees to give shade. It was an open structure. No roof. No cage door. Just enough to keep predators out and space for the bobcat to move a little, if he ever got the strength. Getting him into it was harder. He used Nova. Let her walk slow, brushing her fur against the blind cat as a guide. It took an hour to cross 50 feet. But they made it. Once inside the pen, Ash curled up in a corner and didn't move for a full day. Graham watched from the porch. Part of him still expected the cat to die quietly in the night. But it didn't. Not that night. Not the one after. He started calling it Ash, not because he thought naming a wild thing made it tame, but because the color of its fur near the spine reminded him of fire long gone out, gray, scorched, quiet. Ash was silent. Always. No hisses. No mews. No sound except breathing. Sometimes, at night, Graham would sit outside with Nova beside him, a mug of something warm in his hands, and just listen. The forest breathed in different rhythms. But Ash was always a steady one. In time, the bobcat began to shift positions. Slowly. Tentatively. When Nova approached, he wouldn't flinch anymore. In fact, he seemed to press closer, like her presence gave him direction. It was an odd thing, this triangle between a broken man, a haunted dog, and a blind predator who had no reason to live and no instinct left to flee. Graham began to change too. He cleaned the old tools in the shed. Started fixing the loose shingles on the cabin roof. He even shaved one morning, not because he had to, but because he looked at his reflection and didn't want to be invisible anymore. He didn't tell anyone about Ash. No one would believe it, anyway. Who saves a blind bobcat? Who's saved by one? Ash didn't heal the way a domestic animal might. There were no milestones to mark his recovery. No wagging tail. No purring. No gentle whimpers of gratitude. Wild creatures survive in silence, and Ash was no exception. His stillness wasn't fear anymore, it was instinct, sharpened by pain. And yet, he stayed. Days bled into each other. The world outside the pine line kept turning, but Graham barely noticed. He had started to live in increments of trust. Every time Ash stepped toward the water bowl without recoiling, every time Nova curled closer without the cat backing away, it was a kind of progress. He built Ash a shelter inside the pen, a low wooden half-box with an open face and straw lining. It wasn't elegant, but it kept out the cold. Graham found himself reinforcing the fencing more often than necessary. There were no predators near the cabin that dared come close with Nova around. But it wasn't about that. It was about the illusion of safety. About control in a life that had offered none. Some nights, he caught himself talking to Ash. Just quietly. As he cleaned out the pen or left food. "I used to think the forest needed us," he'd say. "People like me. Scientists. Observers. Protectors. But it doesn't. It just is." Ash never looked at him. Couldn't. But sometimes the bobcat would lift his nose toward the sound of Graham's voice, just a degree or two. Those moments mattered. Graham had started keeping a journal again. Not one filled with grief or poetry, just notes. Observations. Patterns. It was muscle memory from his old life, back when his field notes used to end up in scientific papers. But these entries were different. Ash prefers silence after dusk. He reacts to certain tones in my voice. No visible aggression toward Nova in 6 days. He sniffed the air for over a minute after the wind changed. I think he's using scent more than sound to orient. Still no vocalizations. But he's listening. Still, Ash had his moments. Violent ones. The first came one night after a windstorm. Graham had gone out to check the fencing and found Ash slamming his body into the side of the shelter, again and again. His claws tore at the wood, teeth bared, lips peeled back in raw desperation. It was panic, but not fear. It was as if something in his memory, some predator or trap or place, had come roaring back in the wind, and he couldn't escape it. Nova didn't move. She sat at the corner of the pen, eyes wide, tail low, whimpering softly like a warning to both of them. This isn't about you. Don't interfere. Graham didn't try to stop him. He just opened the gate and sat at the edge, facing away, his voice a quiet metronome of reassurance. You're not there anymore. You're here. Just here. Ash calmed after nearly an hour. Collapsed in the straw, sides heaving. Graham stayed outside until morning. It wasn't the only episode. But over time, they became fewer. Less violent. Sometimes they came after thunderstorms. Sometimes after nothing at all. But Graham began to see the pattern. Ash wasn't just blind. He was haunted. One afternoon, Graham tried something new. He took Nova's old collar, worn leather with a frayed red tag, and held it out toward Ash through the open pen gate. Ash flinched. Recoiled. Graham didn't force it. But the next day, he laid the collar down near the water bowl. The day after that, closer still. By the 4th day, it was resting beneath Ash's chin as he drank. He never wore it. But he let it stay near. That was enough. Nova, meanwhile, had shifted entirely. She no longer guarded the pen, she shared it. Not constantly, but when Ash seemed restless, when the nights stretched long, Nova would lie beside him like a second heartbeat. She didn't nuzzle or lick. She wasn't mothering him. It was deeper than that. It was recognition. Two creatures who had survived things no one else could name. And Graham, watching them, felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Hope. It was Nova who suggested the walks. Not in words, obviously. But in the way she started sitting by the gate each morning, waiting, glancing from Ash to the trail and back again. So Graham opened the gate. Ash didn't move the first day. But the next, he stepped out. Just 2 paces. Then froze. Graham watched every muscle in the cat's body twitch, ears flicking at every leaf flutter, tail taut. Ash's head swiveled toward sound like a radar dish. But he didn't retreat. Nova took a few steps forward. Paused. Ash followed. They walked 5 feet that day. 7 the next. Within a week, they were making slow laps around the clearing, Graham behind them like a silent guardian, his boots sinking into soft moss and damp pine needles. It wasn't graceful. Ash would sometimes stumble, his paw catching on a root or stone, but he never cried out. He simply paused, adjusted, and moved on. His blindness was no longer a cage. It had become a language. One he was learning, one step at a time. Graham watched him track Nova's scent trail like it was a rope through the fog. Ash walked with his head low, body fluid, muscles relearning balance without the gift of sight. Occasionally, he would lift his nose and inhale sharply, catching scent drafts the way wild cats do, navigating not by landmarks, but by air. One evening, a fox darted across their path. Fast. Silent. Ash's head snapped toward it. He didn't chase. Didn't move. But he heard it. Graham stood still, his breath catching. That moment stayed with him. Not because it was dramatic, But because it proved something, the wild wasn't gone from Ash. It had just been buried. And now, slowly, it was waking up. Graham found himself rewriting the boundaries in his mind. He had once thought Ash might die quietly here. Then he'd hoped the Bobcat might live in captivity, safe and limited. But now there was a whisper of something dangerous. Maybe Ash could go back. Back to the forest. Back to something close to freedom. It was a terrifying thought. Because it meant letting go. Graham wasn't ready. Nova knew before he did. She'd started sleeping closer to the tree-line, eyes watching the woods like she was preparing for someone's departure. She still guided Ash, still curled beside him during his spells. But she no longer hovered. She'd begun teaching him subtle movements, nudges, even the occasional bark to steer him around obstacles. She wasn't preparing to lose him. She was preparing him to leave. Graham tried to resist it. He extended the pen. Added more comforts. Fresh straw. A heated lamp for colder nights. But Ash started pacing at night. Restless. Not panicked, ready? And Graham finally stopped pretending. One early morning, long before the sun filtered through the pines, he opened the gate. No words. Just silence. Nova nudged Ash's flank. The Bobcat stepped forward. Paused. Then, in an action that took Graham's breath away, Ash turned. Leaned gently against Nova's shoulder. For just a moment. Then he walked into the woods. No hesitation. No stumble. Graham watched until the forest swallowed him whole. And still, he waited. Hoping Ash would turn back. But he didn't. He was gone. The forest was too quiet without Ash. Graham didn't realize how much space the Bobcat had filled until he was gone. The sounds of the cabin, the hum of the old generator, the creak of wind in the eaves, felt hollow now. Even Nova moved differently, slower, as if she were listening for footsteps that no longer came. Graham kept waiting for a sign. Not something dramatic. Just a broken branch, a print in the mud, a paw-sized indentation in the straw that might mean Ash had returned, even for a night. But the pen stayed untouched. The food left out each morning remained uneaten. Wild things leave quietly. And they rarely come back. Still, Graham walked the same trail every morning, the one they used to take, the slow loop around the clearing, down the ridge, across the shallow creek bed. Nova trotted ahead, nose to the wind, ears swiveling. She still believed. She hadn't given up. And maybe that was the problem. Because after 3 weeks of silence, Graham started to hope again. He told himself Ash was adapting. Learning. Surviving. Blind or not, he had instincts. He had strength. He had the memory of Nova's scent, the rhythm of the land. Maybe that was enough. The days lengthened. The cold broke. Birdsong returned. Spring moved through the forest like a quiet promise, and with it came change, not loud, not fast, but steady. The deer returned first. Then the foxes. Then the darker sounds, the ones Graham didn't like. Coyotes. Ferals. Humans with no business this deep in the pines. He started hearing gunshots in the far distance. Not hunters. Poachers. The kind that left traps instead of bullets. The kind that moved without permits, without warning, without concern. Graham tightened the fencing around the property. He cleaned his rifle. He started walking with Nova a little closer to his side. But he couldn't protect what he couldn't see. And Ash, wherever he was vulnerable. Blind. Alone. And more than that, remembered. Because one morning, for weeks after Ash had left, Graham found a single, unmistakable print in the wet earth outside the gate. A bobcat's paw. Not deep. Not fresh. But real. Nova barked once, low and short, and stood by it like a sentinel. Her tail didn't wag. Her ears didn't perk. This wasn't excitement. It was something more solemn. Recognition. Ash had come back. Only for a moment. Maybe just to smell the air. To be near. But he had come back. And that changed everything. The ache Graham had buried under pragmatism came roaring back to life. He started leaving food out again. Not near the cabin, but deeper in the woods, in places Ash might feel safe. He set up an old trail cam, still working, somehow, facing the creek. Every morning, he checked the card. And every morning, nothing. Until the 10th day. There, grainy but unmistakable, a bobcat. Tail short. Coat rough. Walking with the same low posture Ash had always used. He paused, lifted his head like he was listening to something distant, then moved on. Alive. The photo looped in Graham's mind like a heartbeat. He printed it. Taped it to the fridge. Nova sat and stared at it for minutes each day, like she too believed it could bring him back. But hope is a dangerous thing in the wild. Because hope makes you miss the signs. And the signs were there. It was mid-April when Nova came home injured. Not badly. A limp. A tear near her flank that had already begun to clot. But she was quiet. Nervous. She paced the cabin that night, ears pinned, every shadow a threat. Graham followed her outside. She led him down the southern slope, where the trees grew thinner, and the brush lay scattered in broken patches. There, hidden under a mess of leaves and bone-dry twigs, was a trap. Old. Rusty. Still bloody. It wasn't meant for Ash. Or Nova. It wasn't meant for anything specific. That was the worst part. It was meant to catch. Nothing more. Graham reported it, used the radio to contact the ranger office 3 towns over. But he knew how these things went. No one was coming. Not out here. Not fast enough. So he started watching again. Every sound. Every trail. Nova didn't range as far anymore. She stayed closer to the cabin, sleeping with one ear tilted toward the trees. Some nights, she would wake suddenly and whine, as if hearing something neither of them could see. The pen sat empty. Clean. Waiting. Just in case. And then came the blood. It was on the porch steps one morning. Not much, just 2 small smears, as if something had brushed against the wood. Nova found it first. She sniffed, whined, bolted. Graham followed. They moved fast, faster than they had in months, down through the fern gully, across the dry streambed, deeper than Graham ever dared go alone. And there, beneath a twisted cedar, lay Ash. He was alive. Barely. His body was curled in on itself, like a leaf folded against frost. His side was torn open, ripped and ragged, exposing raw muscle. His front paw hung at a strange angle, twisted unnaturally. His mouth opened slightly with each breath, as if every inhale had to be pulled from a deep place he no longer had access to. He'd crawled here. There was no doubt. Across half a mile of hostile terrain, blind, bleeding, wounded, he had made his way back. To them. Graham didn't think. He dropped to his knees, slid his arms beneath Ash's battered frame, and lifted. The bobcat didn't struggle. Didn't hiss. He just pressed his head faintly against Graham's chest, and let go. Graham ran. He hadn't run in years. Not like this. Not with weight in his arms and fire in his lungs. Nova circled him, darting ahead, clearing the trail, guiding. They reached the cabin in minutes. Graham laid Ash gently on the thick straw inside the pen and dropped to the floor beside him. He worked quickly. Cleaned the wounds. Boiled water. Wrapped the twisted leg in soft cloth. He whispered the whole time, not comforting words, but old stories. Stories about bobcats and owls and trees that could bend without breaking. Ash didn't move. His breathing was shallow, but present. Nova curled beside him. Night fell. The forest waited. And Graham, for the first time in years, prayed. Not to save Ash, but for one more sunrise. Just one. The dawn that broke over the edge of the northern bluff didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like a quiet reckoning. The frost lingered in the dry blades of grass outside the small cabin, each one a silver needle trembling in the stillness. Inside, the fire had gone out hours ago, and the silence was thick. Isaac sat on the wooden floor with his back against the wall, arms draped loosely over his knees. His eyes, red-rimmed and sunken from sleepless nights, didn't move from the form huddled beside him. The blind bobcat was curled tightly on the folded blanket, her breathing shallow, ribs rising in weak, uneven motions. She hadn't touched the food since yesterday. Hadn't moved since just after midnight. Isaac knew what that meant. Leo was lying beside her, his massive golden retriever frame cradling the bobcat like a living wall of warmth. His muzzle rested gently against her neck, eyes flickering with that impossible dog's sadness, the kind that feels too knowing. Too old. She's not gonna make it, is she? Isaac's voice cracked as he whispered the question to no one. The vet had called 3 times. Left messages. We need to prepare for palliative care. It's not uncommon for injured wildcats to enter final shutdown even after months of healing. Especially with blindness. Depression can be a silent killer. But Leo had refused to leave her side. Ever since that night, the howl, the blood, the rescue, Leo had taken over the job Isaac had only begun, becoming her tether to life. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass with slow, mournful groans. Somewhere far off, coyotes yipped at the sunrise. Isaac reached out and gently ran his fingers down the bobcat's spine. Her fur was drier now, thin in places where the winter had bitten too hard. But her body had grown stronger in other ways. The once frail muscles had slowly hardened beneath his care. She had lived here for nearly 5 months now. Survived what no one thought she could. And yet this surrender felt like something deeper than exhaustion. It felt like a decision. That morning, Isaac made one too. He drove with her wrapped gently in a thick wool blanket, Leo in the back seat pressed against her like a shield. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His breath sharp, broken. He didn't drive to the vet. Instead, he turned west, toward the edge of the mountain valley. Toward the ridge no one visited in winter. It was a hard place to reach. Rocky, uneven, exposed. But Isaac knew she'd remember it. It was where she had once screamed into the dark with blood on her fur, and nothing left to lose. It was where Leo had first touched his nose to her cheek and refused to leave. And it was where she had, for the first time, let another soul in. The wind howled through the trees like a warning when he reached the outcrop. Isaac took her gently in his arms. She was featherlight now. A shadow of herself. But her breath was still there. And her heart still beat, barely. He placed her on the soft moss beside the old fallen pine. Leo lay down beside her without being asked. Isaac didn't speak. Just sat down with them, knees pulled to his chest, the silence saying what words could not. Time slowed. Minutes passed like hours. The cold deepened. Then, she moved. It wasn't much. Just a twitch of her ear. A slow lift of her head. Her nose lifted slightly as if catching a scent in the wind. Then came something Isaac hadn't seen in days. A sound. It was soft. Like a low, questioning chirp. And it came not from her throat, but from her heart. Isaac leaned in. His breath caught. Then it happened again, clearer this time. She was purring. The weeks that followed didn't bring miracles. The bobcat, who Isaac had named Wren just days before, never regained her vision. Her health remained fragile. The vet made weekly visits now. But something else had changed. She started eating again. She began exploring the edges of the house at night, her body navigating by memory and scent. She no longer flinched at new sounds. She no longer growled at her reflection in the glass. And Leo stayed close as ever. But he no longer hovered. He no longer lay against her every hour. He gave her space. Because she was asking for it. She was coming back. Not as she was. Not even as Isaac had hoped she might be. But as something else. Something new. 6 weeks later, on a sunlit afternoon, a ranger named Evie Dalton drove up to Isaac's property with a permit in her hand and a heavy expression on her face. "I read the reports," she said. "I read the vet assessments. And I watched the footage you sent. The bodcam from the outcrop. Isaac had documented it all. The final climb. The purrs. The moments after. Evie folded the paper slowly. This is not protocol. She's blind. She's still wild. And this doesn't count as full rehabilitation. Isaac didn't speak. He just stood with Leo at his side and waited. But, she continued, I've also never seen a case like this. Never seen a wild bobcat form a bond like this. With a dog. With a man. She stepped forward, laid the permit on his porch rail. You'll need to file quarterly reports. But she stays. Isaac exhaled. And inside the cabin, Wren chirped. In the spring, when the ground had softened and the creek thawed, Isaac took her to the woods behind the ridge. She walked beside him now, not leash, not caged. Just free. Sometimes she'd veer off, nose to the wind, ears alert. But she always circled back. Leo followed behind. And Isaac, once a man trying to disappear into solitude, now found himself building a sanctuary of his own. Not for the world. Not for people. But for those who had no one else. There are some wounds the world forgets. Some creatures the world discards. And some hearts that, even in blindness, find a way to see what others can't. Wren never saw the sun rise again. But she felt it, every day, through the warmth of a dog's body at her side. Through the hands that never forced her, never tamed her. Only waited. And through the silence of a man who didn't try to save her. Only gave her the choice to stay.